Teresa Billington-Gregg is the most probably well-known person who was against the WSP and broke away from them. She founded the Women's Freedom League. Her problem with it was mainly that it wasn't very democratic. In 1907, she wrote up a new constitution which she was going to present at a congress of lots of different representatives of all the branches of the union to come together. And she presented this to Emmeline, and what it basically did, it gave women, all women who were involved, more of a say in what was going to happen and what their policies were going to be, when they were going to be doing things and what they actually were. Emmeline tore this up dramatically in front of everybody and said, nobody has to be in my army if they don't want to be. This one, please. And this is a quote from Teresa, and it basically sums up everything, all the different reasons why women split away. It said that WSP has cut down its demand for one of sex equality to one of votes on a limited basis. It has suppressed free speech on fundamental issues. It has gradually edged the working class element out of the ranks. It has become socially exclusive, continuously correct, gracefully fashionable, ultra-respectable, and narrowly religious. This isn't, in mainstream, when you learn about this in school, you have to learn about this in England when you're 14 years old. And you're just told that these women were great and they're really radical. None of this is spoken about, and again, this is trying to establish, well, no, challenge established narrative. Female chantists, sort of from the 19th century, distanced themselves from any ideas of suffrage movement because they were always brought up by middle-class women. What is interesting is how some feminist movements internationally sort of do follow a trend of being quite exclusively one group of people who were generally educated. An example of this is in 1848, some feminist activities here in New York, where the women who were meeting together and organising did not make any effort to try and include factory workers and black women who arguably were the most oppressed in the country. The other thing I want to talk about is militancy. Obviously, it shows how passionate they are. It was mainly, their aim was to publicise the movement, to get it into the national headlines and make people way more aware of what was going on. But there's some aspects of it, and I want to really question how radical things were. This is a picture of Emmeline and Christabel imprisoned in Holloway Jail. Suffragettes would get themselves in situations to try to be arrested. And obviously this would play upon a society's sort of free. What the problem was the suffragettes were middle class, and so they weren't women who would have been to prison all the time. They were trying to get these respectable women to be put in prison so that society would be shocked. Why are you doing this to respectable women? But this distance really annoyed working class women more because they were thinking, well, we've always been sent to prison for what we've been doing. And it's quite interesting to note that when one middle class suffragette dressed up in working class clothing, when she was taken to prison along with her sort of suffragette comrades, she was treated a lot worse. She was beaten, had a lot less privileges as they did in the prison, which is interesting to know. So the suffragettes are trying to campaign to be recognised as part of the democracy and be as strong, responsible as men and worthy of respect. But sometimes they try and play the victim, and they deliberately try to get themselves put in prison and say, look what men are doing to us. Look how we're being treated in these prisons. And this was seen by some people as counterproductive because they're not trying to say we are equal to men and we can be treated in the same way. They're trying to play on this perception that women needed greater care and special consideration. Again, the idea of distancing working class women was and a feature of some of the militant activities. The suffragettes set fire to this racecourse in 1913. When the level of militancy escalated to arson, quite a few people broke away, including Sylvia Pankhurst, because they thought they're doing far too much for too small a measure of franchise, and it's going too far. The thing with setting fire to stuff and being put in prison, working class women found it really difficult then to contribute to the movement, because if they were to be put in prison, they would be in a real problem. Middle class women had servants and maybe maids or someone to look after their children, to clean, cook and be in their homes. Working class women didn't have a sort of safety net. The middle class women did. And that's why this distance them even further. Another thing about questioning how radical they were was what else were they doing in society at that time? What were they trying to achieve? The WSPU was ultimately and only campaigning for the vote. That's what they saw as the be-all and end-all of campaigning. Emmeline says, our members are absolutely single-minded. They concentrate all their forces on one object, political equality with men. No member of the WSPU divides her attention between suffrage and other social reforms. That means these sort of social elite middle-class women weren't really allowed by the leaders to join in with other social issues. Other groups I'm going to talk about later thought, well, what on earth is the point in that? Why are you trying to get the vote if you're not going to imagine how it could be used in areas such as campaigning for birth control and equal pay in work? Next one. Okay, so I've spoken quite a lot about Emmeline and Christabel and how there are misconceptions towards them. But now I'm going to talk about Sylvia, who was quite a bit different in many, many ways. Sylvia is called, in England, the most prolific female British communist there ever was. And obviously she was not happy when they started to move away from the ideologies and the concepts that she helped found this group on. In 1912, she went to London with her American friend Sally Emerson, against Christabel and Emily's will and advice. And because she wanted to go and set up a group and a part of a branch of the union in the East End of London, which is much more working class. And she elected to speak on behalf of working class women, which was something they really didn't want them to do. They didn't want them to offend women who could give them financial support, and they thought that it wasn't right because she wanted to set up a group to advocate universal suffrage rather than limited suffrage. Next one. So this is the East London Federation of Suffragettes, founded by Sylvia Pankhurst. Here she is in front of a bookshop which they took as their original headquarters. The people she's talking to are a mixture of working class men and working class women. And that's who she's trying to talk to. She's not trying to aim the message and trying to recruit women from a higher class. She's trying to get it out to anyone who's around on the street. In 1913, Sylvia was summoned to France, where Emmeline and Christabel were in hiding. They were trying not to be arrested because obviously all the suffragettes were repeatedly arrested, and she was trying to evade arrest at this point. So Sylvia goes to France to see her sister and her mother, and is told basically that her group could either drop its working class convictions, its ideas of bettering conditions for all workers, or trying to better conditions for women in their domestic and their social lives, and to drop all this, or it would be expelled and excluded from the group. And she said, well, no, this is what I believe in, this is what these women believe in. The vote, we need the vote to fight against poverty and destitution, not to brag that we're on equal terms to men. So again, like they did with Adela, Emily and Christabel break away completely with their family because they have completely different political convictions.